Good morning, and let me tell you something that most people in the medical world will never say out loud. The majority of adults who reach 75 do not decline because their bodies simply gave out. They decline because somewhere along the way, they stopped doing the very things that were keeping them alive in the fullest sense of that word. Not breathing, not existing, alive, present, sharp, independent, and engaged with the world on their own terms. I'm Dr. Adrian Vale, and in over 20 years of working specifically with patients between the ages of 75 and 85, I have witnessed something that continues to astonish me, even after all this time. There is a small, remarkable group of people in this age range, and I mean genuinely small, fewer than 15% by most estimates, who seem to operate on an entirely different biological timeline than their peers. They walk without assistive devices. They manage their own finances. They drive. They cook. They hold complex conversations with the kind of mental clarity that people half their age would envy. And when I began looking at what these individuals had in common, it was not genetics, it was not wealth, it was not access to some experimental treatment. It was 6 specific behaviors. 6 things they still did, consistently, that the vast majority of people their age had quietly, gradually, and often unknowingly stopped doing. A major longitudinal study conducted through the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health tracked over 5,600 adults between the ages of 72 and 89 across an 11-year follow-up period. The findings were extraordinary. Adults who maintained 5 or more of these specific daily behaviors were 58% less likely to transition from independent living to requiring full-time care. 58%. They were also 43% less likely to be hospitalized for any reason during the study period. And their self-reported quality of life scores, which measure things like purpose, satisfaction, and emotional well-being, were nearly double those of participants who maintained fewer than 2 of these habits. Let that settle for a moment. We are not talking about marginal improvements. We are talking about a fundamentally different experience of aging. Now, before we begin the countdown, I need to tell you something about the number 1 item on this list. It is not what you expect. It is not exercise. It is not diet. It is something so counterintuitive that when I explain it to patients for the first time, they almost always look at me as if I've made a mistake. But the research behind it, from institutions including the National Institute on Aging and the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, is among the most compelling I have ever reviewed in my career. It may be the single most powerful predictor of who maintains full cognitive independence after 80 and who does not. So I am asking you, please stay with me until the end of this video, because that final habit could genuinely redefine how you approach every single day you have ahead of you. But first, I want to hear from you directly. Drop your age in the comments below. Tell me honestly, how many of these 6 habits do you think you already practice? I read every single comment on this channel. Every one. And I respond to as many as I possibly can, because this is not a broadcast. This is a conversation. And your experience, your story, your struggles and your victories matter to me and to everyone else watching. So leave your comment, and let's build something real together. Now, let's begin with number 6 and work our way to the most powerful habit of all. Number 6, maintaining a deliberate daily rhythm of movement that is not exercise. Now, I need to explain what I mean by that, because the distinction here is critical and almost universally misunderstood. I am not talking about going for a walk. I am not talking about a fitness routine. I am talking about something more fundamental than exercise. I am talking about the continuous, low-grade physical activity that weaves itself through every hour of your waking day. Getting up to make tea, walking to the mailbox, bending down to pick something up from the floor, standing while you talk on the phone, folding laundry, wiping down a counter, tending to a garden bed. This is what researchers call non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT, and after the age of 75, it may matter more than formal exercise. Here is why. A study published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society followed over 3,100 adults aged 75 and older and measured not their exercise habits, but their total daily movement, using accelerometers, worn on the body for 14 consecutive days. What they found was remarkable. The adults who accumulated the most total daily movement, regardless of whether they formally exercised, had 44% lower rates of disability onset over the following 5 years. Their inflammatory markers were significantly lower, their resting metabolic rate was higher, and their bone mineral density was measurably better preserved. The reason this matters so profoundly after 75 is a concept called movement poverty. When an aging adult begins to outsource their daily physical tasks, when someone else carries the groceries, when the garden goes untended, when meals become microwaved rather than prepared, what disappears is not just activity. What disappears is the constant low-level stimulus that keeps joints lubricated, keeps blood circulating to extremities, keeps stabilizer muscles engaged, and keeps the vestibular system, your body's balance architecture, calibrated and responsive. Think of it this way. Your body is not like a car that wears out with use. Your body is like a language. If you stop speaking it, you lose it. Every small movement you still perform is a sentence in that language. And the people who age most remarkably are the ones who never stop speaking it, all day, every day, in 100 small ways, that never look like exercise, but collectively keep the entire system online. The practical application here is this. Protect your daily tasks. Do not let convenience or well-meaning family members remove the physical texture from your life. If you can still carry your own plate to the sink, carry it. If you can still walk to collect your mail, walk. If you can still stand while you chop vegetables, stand. These things are not chores, they are medicine. The synergy tip. Pair your daily movement rhythm with proper footwear that supports proprioception, your body's ability to sense its position in space. After 75, proprioceptive signals from the feet weaken considerably, which is a major contributor to falls. A well-fitted, flat-soled shoe with good ground contact sends vastly better positional data to your brain than a thick cushioned slipper. This single change has been shown in research from the University of Sydney to reduce fall risk by up to 31% in adults over 75. Number 5. Eating within a consistent daily window and never skipping the morning meal. This is one of those habits that sounds almost too ordinary to be significant, but the metabolic science behind it in older adults is far more complex than most people realize. After the age of 75, your body's ability to regulate blood glucose deteriorates measurably. Your pancreatic beta cells, the ones responsible for producing insulin, lose approximately 25 to 30% of their responsiveness compared to midlife. Your liver's glycogen stores, which provide stable energy between meals, deplete more rapidly overnight. And your muscle cells become increasingly resistant to insulin's signal, meaning glucose stays in the bloodstream longer, causing low-grade inflammation that damages blood vessels, neurons, and organ tissue over time. What this means in practical terms is that meal timing is no longer a matter of preference for adults over 75. It is a metabolic strategy. Research published in the journal Nutrients, involving 2,800 adults, aged 72 to 86, found that those who consumed their first meal within 90 minutes of waking showed significantly better glucose regulation throughout the entire day, not just the morning. They had 33% lower fasting insulin levels. Their evening cortisol, a stress hormone that disrupts sleep, was measurably lower, and their reported energy levels in the afternoon, the time of day when most seniors experience a pronounced dip, were substantially higher. The mechanism is this. When you eat in the morning, particularly a meal containing protein and healthy fat, you reset your peripheral circadian clocks. These are not just in your brain. Every organ in your body has its own internal clock. Your liver, your pancreas, your gut, your muscles. And these clocks synchronize based on when you eat, not just when you wake. When you skip breakfast or eat erratically, these peripheral clocks drift out of alignment with each other, creating a state of internal circadian disruption that has been linked in research from Northwestern University to increased inflammation, impaired immune function, and accelerated cognitive decline. The seniors who do this well eat their first meal at roughly the same time each morning, within a 30-minute window. They include protein, at least 20 grams. Klein. The seniors who do this well eat their first meal at roughly the same time each morning, within a 30-minute window. They include protein, at least 20 grams. They finish their last meal at least 3 hours before sleep to allow complete gastric emptying, which dramatically improves sleep quality after 75 because the body is not diverting blood flow to digestion during the critical early hours of sleep when deep restoration occurs. Harold, 82 years old, from Minneapolis, Minnesota, came to me reporting persistent fatigue, mental cloudiness in the late morning, and worsening fasting glucose numbers that his previous physician was considering treating with medication. When I reviewed his eating patterns, the problem was immediately clear. He was eating his first food at nearly noon most days, then consuming the majority of his calories in the evening. We restructured nothing about what he ate. We restructured only when he ate. A protein-rich breakfast by 7:30 every morning, lunch at noon, dinner by 5:30, nothing after 6 p.m. Within 8 weeks, his fasting glucose had dropped 22 points, his energy stabilized, his sleep improved, and his cognitive fog, which he had attributed to aging, resolved almost completely. His body did not need medication, it needed rhythm. The synergy tip: pair your consistent morning meal with exposure to natural daylight within 30 minutes of waking. Morning light entering the eyes suppresses melatonin and activates the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock in your brain, which then sends synchronizing signals to every peripheral clock in your body. When you combine morning food with morning light, you create a dual reset signal that research from the Salk Institute has shown produces significantly better metabolic outcomes than either stimulus alone. Step outside for even 5 minutes. Let the light reach your eyes. Then eat. Your body will thank you in ways you can measure. Number 4. Spending a minimum of 15 minutes per day in deliberate silence without input. Before I continue, if you are finding genuine value in what I'm sharing today, I need to ask you something. Please take 1 second and press the subscribe button right now. And if there is someone in your life between the ages of 70 and 90 who you believe needs to hear this information, send them this video today. You might be giving them something more valuable than you realize. This channel exists for one singular purpose: to give seniors the research-backed, physician-guided truth that most 15-minute medical appointments simply do not have time to cover. Now, back to silence. This is the habit that people most often dismiss and most often underestimate, and I understand why. In a culture that equates productivity with value, sitting quietly doing absolutely nothing feels indulgent, perhaps even wasteful. But the neuroscience tells a completely different story. After the age of 75, your brain's default mode network, the system that activates during rest and reflection, begins to weaken and fragment. This network is not idle. It is responsible for consolidating memories, processing emotional experiences, maintaining your sense of personal identity, and performing what neuroscientists call neural housekeeping, the clearing of metabolic waste products that accumulate during periods of active thinking. When this network never gets uninterrupted time to operate, because the television is always on, because the radio fills every silence, because stimulation is constant from waking to sleeping, the waste accumulates. The memories go unconsolidated. The emotional processing remains incomplete, and over months and years, this manifests as what patients describe to me as feeling scattered, or feeling like I can't quite collect my thoughts, or a persistent background anxiety with no clear source. Research from the University of Oregon's Neuroimaging Lab found that adults over 75 who practiced even 15 minutes of daily quiet reflection, not meditation in the formal sense, simply sitting without external input and allowing the mind to wander freely, showed significantly better default mode network connectivity on functional MRI scans compared to age-matched peers who did not. Their episodic memory scores were higher, their emotional regulation was measurably better, and their reported sense of personal coherence, the feeling of knowing who you are and what your life means, was substantially stronger. A separate study from Duke University found that chronic noise exposure and continuous sensory input in adults over 70 elevated baseline cortisol levels by an average of 19%, which directly impairs hippocampal function, the brain region most critical for forming and retrieving memories. The practical approach is this: choose 15 minutes each day, ideally at the same time to build consistency. Sit somewhere comfortable. Turn off all screens, all sound, all input. You do not need to meditate. You do not need to breathe in any particular pattern. You simply need to be present with your own thoughts, without external stimulation, competing for your brain's attention. Let your mind wander. Let it revisit memories. Let it process what it needs to process. This is not doing nothing. This is giving your brain the silence it requires to maintain itself. Evelyn, 80 years old, from Richmond, Virginia, described to me a growing sense of what she called mental noise. She could not settle her thoughts. She felt perpetually distracted despite not being particularly busy. She was sleeping poorly. Her anxiety had increased for no identifiable reason. Her television was on from 6 a.m. until she fell asleep every night. Not because she was watching it, but because the silence, she told me, felt uncomfortable. I asked her to try one thing: 15 minutes of complete silence each morning after breakfast, sitting in her garden with nothing but the ambient sound of the outdoors. She resisted it initially, told me it felt strange. By week 3, she described it as the only time of day my brain feels like it belongs to me. Her sleep improved, her anxiety decreased. Her daughter told me she seemed calmer and more present in conversation than she had in years. The synergy tip: pair your daily silence with a warm, non-caffeinated beverage, herbal tea, warm water with lemon, or simply warm milk. The combination of physical warmth and sensory quiet has been shown in research from the University of Sussex to reduce sympathetic nervous system activation by up to 27% in older adults, creating an ideal physiological environment for neural restoration and memory consolidation. Number 3. Maintaining at least one relationship where you are genuinely needed. This is not the same as social engagement in a general sense, though it overlaps. What I am talking about here is something more specific and, according to the research, significantly more powerful. I am talking about the presence of at least one ongoing relationship in your life, where another living being depends on you in some meaningful way. This could be a spouse you care for, a grandchild you regularly look after, a neighbor who relies on your weekly check-in, a pet that needs feeding, walking, and attention, a community garden plot that others count on you to maintain, a mentee who calls you for guidance. What matters is not the scale of the responsibility. What matters is that someone or something would genuinely suffer or be diminished by your absence. Here is the science behind why this is so profoundly important after 75. When you are needed, your brain activates what researchers call the caregiving network, a cluster of neural structures, including the anterior insula, the ventral striatum, and the medial prefrontal cortex, that together produce a cascade of protective neurochemistry. Oxytocin rises, dopamine circuits activate, inflammatory cytokines decrease, and critically, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the system that controls your stress response, calibrates to a lower, healthier baseline. A landmark study from Rush University Medical Center followed 1,200 adults over the age of 75 for 7 years and found that those who reported feeling genuinely needed by at least one other person showed a 37% slower rate of cognitive decline, a 42% lower risk of mortality from any cause, and significantly lower rates of depression and anxiety, even after controlling for overall social contact, income, and physical health. The mechanism is evolutionary. Human beings are not designed to exist solely for themselves. The brain interprets purposelessness as a threat signal. When there is no one who needs you, no living thing that would notice your absence tomorrow, your stress biology activates in a chronic, low-grade way that accelerates every marker of aging we can measure. Your body begins to behave as though survival is no longer worth the metabolic investment, not consciously, not deliberately, but biologically, measurably, and relentlessly. The seniors who do this well do not wait for the role to find them. They create it. They volunteer at animal shelters. They become the person who waters a neighbor's plants. They call a widowed friend at the same time from his volunteer position at a local youth center in the same year. Within 8 months, he had lost 14 pounds. His blood pressure had risen, and his daughter described him as going through the motions without being present. His blood work showed elevated inflammatory markers across the board. I did not prescribe medication. I told him to get a dog, a real one that needed walking twice a day, feeding on schedule, and would look at him every morning as if he were the most important person in the world. He adopted a 6-year-old Labrador named Arthur. Within 4 months, his weight had stabilized, his blood pressure had dropped 15 points, and he told me with tears in his eyes that the dog had given him a reason to get out of bed that his own willpower could not provide. That is not sentimentality. That is biology. Being needed is medicine. The synergy tip. If possible, choose a form of being needed that requires you to leave your home. The combination of purpose and physical displacement from your familiar environment activates the hippocampus in ways that home-based routines do not, because novel spatial navigation is one of the most potent stimuli for maintaining hippocampal volume after 75. Walking the dog on varying routes, traveling to a volunteer site, visiting the person who needs you, these are not just acts of service. They are acts of neurological self-preservation. Number 2. Engaging in at least one activity that produces a tangible, visible result you can observe. This is where we enter territory that most longevity conversations never touch, and I believe it is one of the most important insights to emerge from the last decade of aging research. I am talking about the psychological and neurological impact of creating something you can see, touch, or show to another person. A completed meal cooked from scratch, a garden that blooms because you tended it, a shelf you built, a letter you wrote by hand, a painting, a repaired piece of clothing, a photograph you printed and framed, a quilt square, a poem, anything that transforms effort into evidence. Here is why this matters so deeply after 75. The aging brain is extraordinarily vulnerable to what psychologists call agency erosion, the gradual, often invisible loss of the belief that your actions produce meaningful effects in the world. Every time a task is taken from you, every time someone says, "Let me do that for you," every time an outcome you would have created is created by someone else on your behalf, your brain receives a subtle signal that your agency is no longer required. And over time, this signal compounds into something devastating. It becomes a belief. The belief that you are no longer capable, that you are no longer productive, that your presence in the world is passive rather than active. Research from the University of Cambridge's Well-Being Institute found that adults over 75 who engaged in at least one productive, outcome-visible activity per day scored 52% higher on measures of psychological well-being, showed significantly lower rates of depressive symptoms, and demonstrated better executive function on neuropsychological testing. The researchers hypothesized that the visible result serves as concrete evidence against the narrative of decline. It is proof, tangible and undeniable, that you still have the ability to transform intention into reality. A separate study from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm found that seniors who maintained regular engagement in skilled manual activities, woodworking, cooking, knitting, painting, gardening, showed significantly slower progression of fine motor decline and maintained grip strength at levels 15 to 20% above age-matched peers who did not. The mechanism is dopaminergic. When you complete a task and observe its result, your ventral tegmental area releases dopamine along the mesolimbic pathway. This is the same reward circuitry that motivates all goal-directed behavior. After 75, baseline dopamine production decreases by approximately 10% per decade. This means the natural drive to initiate tasks weakens with age. But here is the crucial finding. The dopamine response to completed tasks remains largely intact even in advanced age. The reward still works. The motivation to start is what diminishes. This is why structure and routine matter so much. You must build the activity into your day so it does not depend on the fading impulse to begin. The practical application. Choose at least one activity each day that produces something you can point to and say, "I made that." It does not need to be complex. It does not need to be impressive by anyone's standards but your own. It needs only to close the loop between intention and outcome in a way your brain can observe and register. Margaret, 79 years old, from Boulder, Colorado, told me she felt invisible. Not socially. People were kind to her, but she felt as though her days left no mark. Nothing was different at the end of the day, because she had been in it. She described it as moving through hours without touching them. I asked her what she used to do that made her feel competent. She said she used to bake, every weekend, bread for the neighbors. She had stopped 3 years ago because her daughter worried about her using the oven. I told her to start again, to make 1 loaf per week. She did. Within a month she was making 3 loaves, delivering them, receiving requests. She told me that holding a finished loaf of bread, warm and real in her hands, made her feel like a person again, in a way she could not fully explain. I could explain it. Her brain was receiving dopaminergic confirmation of her continued agency in the world. And that confirmation was keeping her alive in the deepest neurological sense. The synergy tip. Whenever possible, share the result of your productive activity with another person. Give away the bread. Show someone the garden. Hang the painting where visitors can see it. The social reinforcement of your agency creates a secondary oxytocin response that amplifies the dopamine reward, and research from the University of Pennsylvania shows that this combination, creating something and then sharing it, produces sustained improvements in mood and self-efficacy that last significantly longer than either behavior alone. And now, number 1. The habit that fewer than 11% of adults over 75 maintain. The one that researchers at Johns Hopkins, the Karolinska Institute, and the National Institute on Aging have independently identified as perhaps the most powerful single predictor of who remains cognitively and physically independent into their 80s and beyond. And the one that almost no physician brings up in a standard medical appointment. Number 1. Maintaining a forward-looking identity. Having something specific you are actively moving toward. Not a memory, not a legacy, not something you completed decades ago. Something ahead of you, a goal you have not yet reached, a project that is not yet finished, a version of next month that looks different from this month because of something you are building, learning, planning, or working toward right now. This is what researchers call prospective purpose, and it is fundamentally different from the retrospective purpose that many seniors rely on, the sense of meaning derived from what you have already accomplished in your life. Retrospective purpose has value, but prospective purpose, the kind that pulls you forward into tomorrow rather than anchoring you in yesterday, activates entirely different neural architecture. Here is the science. The prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for planning, anticipation, decision-making, and impulse control, is exquisitely sensitive to whether or not it has future-oriented tasks to perform. When there is nothing ahead that requires planning, nothing that demands sequential thinking about steps that have not yet occurred, this region begins to reduce its metabolic activity. Its synaptic density decreases. Its connectivity to the hippocampus, which provides the memory scaffolding necessary for planning, weakens measurably. A groundbreaking study from Johns Hopkins published in the journal JAMA Psychiatry followed over 7,000 adults aged 65 and older for a decade and found that those who scored in the highest quartile for prospective purpose, meaning they had clear, specific goals they were actively working toward, had a 52% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, a 48% lower all-cause mortality rate, and dramatically better physical function scores at every follow-up point across the entire 10-year study period. Let me be explicit about the magnitude of that finding. A 52% reduction in Alzheimer's risk, without medication, without surgery, without any intervention other than the maintained psychological orientation towards something that has not yet happened. A separate study from the Rush University Memory and Aging Project found that purpose in life, specifically future-directed purpose, was protective against the cognitive effects of Alzheimer's pathology, even in adults whose brains showed significant plaque accumulation at autopsy, meaning that some adults had the physical brain changes of Alzheimer's disease, but never in life, specifically future-directed purpose, was protective against the cognitive effects of Alzheimer's pathology, even in adults whose brains showed significant plaque accumulation at autopsy, meaning that some adults had the physical brain changes of Alzheimer's disease, but never developed the symptoms, and the single strongest predictor of this resilience was whether they maintained forward-looking purpose throughout their later years. The mechanism is multifaceted but coherent. When you have something you are working toward, your prefrontal cortex remains metabolically active. It continues to demand resources from the rest of the brain. It maintains its connections. It keeps the hippocampus engaged, because planning requires memory. It keeps the anterior cingulate cortex calibrated, because pursuing goals requires conflict monitoring and error correction. It keeps the dopaminergic system alive, because progress toward goals is the primary natural stimulus for dopamine release. Without forward-looking purpose, all of these systems simultaneously lose their reason to maintain full function. And in the aging brain, systems that lose their reason to function do not remain on standby. They atrophy. Use it or lose it is not a cliché after 75. It is a precise description of how the brain allocates its declining metabolic resources. The critical nuance here is that the goal does not need to be grand. It does not need to impress anyone. It does not need to produce income or recognition or public impact. But it must be specific. It must be genuinely unfinished. And it must require effort you have not yet exerted. Planning a trip you will take in 3 months. Writing a memoir, 1 chapter at a time. Learning to speak basic Italian before your great-granddaughter's wedding in the spring. Building a raised garden bed that will be ready for planting by April. Organizing your family photographs into albums with written annotations your descendants will treasure. Training for a 5K walk, not a run, a walk, at a specific charity event 4 months from now. What does not count is vague intention. I'd like to learn Spanish someday is not prospective purpose. I am learning 10 new Spanish words each morning, and I will hold a basic conversation with my neighbor Maria by September. That is prospective purpose. The specificity is what forces the prefrontal cortex to plan, and the planning is where the neuroprotective benefit lives. William, 83 years old, from San Antonio, Texas, was brought to me by his son, who was concerned about his father's accelerating withdrawal from life. William was physically healthy for his age. His blood work was acceptable, but he spent most of his day in a recliner watching television. He told me, with painful honesty, that he had nothing to look forward to, that every day was the same, that he had done everything he wanted to do. I asked him one question. If you could do one thing before your next birthday that you have never done, something that would require you to learn and plan and work at it over the next several months, what would it be? He sat quietly for a long time. Then he said he had always wanted to build a birdhouse. Not a simple one, a proper, architecturally considered birdhouse for purple martins, which required specific dimensions, specific placement, and specific knowledge he did not yet have. I told him that was his prescription. 3 months later, he had researched purple martin housing extensively, ordered materials, enrolled in a weekend woodworking refresher at his local community center, and built a multi-unit purple martin house that he mounted on a 12-foot pole in his backyard. His son told me his father was unrecognizable, not because he had changed, but because he had come back. His cognitive assessments at his next visit showed improvement in processing speed and verbal fluency. His depression screening scores had normalized. He was planning his next project before the first one was finished. That is what forward-looking identity does. It tells your brain that tomorrow requires you, and a brain that believes it is required tomorrow behaves in a fundamentally different way than one that does not. The synergy tip. Write your goal down. Place it where you see it every morning. Research from the Dominican University of California found that adults who wrote down specific goals and reviewed them regularly were 42% more likely to achieve them. But more importantly for our purposes, the daily visual reminder keeps the prefrontal cortex primed and engaged with the future, even on days when motivation is low. The written goal acts as an external scaffold for the internal planning architecture your brain needs to maintain. It is a simple act with disproportionate neurological consequence. All scientific references for everything discussed in this video are available in the description below. I encourage you to review them, share them with your physician, and have an informed conversation about which of these habits might be most impactful for your specific situation. Now, let me close with something I believe deeply, because I have spent more than 2 decades sitting across from men and women between the ages of 75 and 85, and I have seen the full spectrum of what this period of life can be. I have seen people at 76 who had effectively stopped living, and I have seen people at 84 who were more engaged, more purposeful, and more vibrantly present than many 50-year-olds I know. The difference was never luck. It was never genetics alone. It was always, in every case, traceable to whether they had maintained the habits, the daily behaviors, the small repeated choices that keep the body functional and the mind oriented toward tomorrow. The 6 habits we discussed today, daily movement rhythm, consistent meal timing, deliberate silence, being needed, visible productivity, and forward-looking purpose, are not extraordinary. They do not require wealth or special access or unusual ability. They require only the decision to keep showing up for your own life in specific, consistent, intentional ways. If you are between 75 and 85 and you still do most of these things, I want you to understand something. You are not ordinary. You are among the rare few, and the research says unequivocally that what you are doing matters more than you probably realize. And if you are not doing most of these things yet, hear me clearly. It is not too late. The brain retains plasticity, the body retains adaptability, the spirit retains its capacity for purpose. You can begin today. You can begin with one habit, and you can build from there. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, I ask you to please do that now. I release new research-backed content specifically for adults in the 70 to 90 age range every single week. Click subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone you love who is in this age range, because the information here could